Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm back with a new What If. This one's a little bit different than some of my previous What Ifs. Previously, when I've done this, I've talked about certain inflection points in comics history and what might have happened if they had gone a different direction. Today, I'm going to talk about a potential inflection point that we're at now and ask the question, what if DC licensed its characters out to everybody? So, in one of my previous videos, I talked about the fact that back in the early 80s, before Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC was really struggling, and they approached Marvel to see if Marvel would license their characters. And what would have happened in that case is the DC line of comics would have completely shut down. DC Comics would have shut down, and Marvel was going to take over the characters. And Jim Shooter's talked about this. Their plan was to launch a line of DC character comics with the seven, what they considered the top characters, so like Superman, Batman, Green Lantern. And they were just going to do those titles to start with. And then once sales were going, if they could see how people were reacting, then they would build out their own version of the DC universe from there. But they ended up not doing that, basically because they were worried about the government cracking down on them for under the anti-monopoly laws, because Marvel and DC had such a huge market share at the time, and Marvel had been at the time was currently being sued by First Comics, I think it was, over distribution, where they said that they had too much control over the distribution system. Marvel thought it was too dangerous to have such a big market share and such a big command of the market, because they were afraid that the government would step in and break up the company. So they decided for legal reasons not to do it. And that's the only reason why that didn't happen. Now, situation is a little bit different today, but it's similar in some ways in that Marvel's doing really well. You know, relatively speaking, they're still top of the game, and they have a very stable base because they're owned by Disney. However, DC Comics is doing very poorly. They've had all these restructurings over at Warner Brothers, which is also just bought out. And, uh, a few years ago, they moved DC Comics out to the West Coast, and they're once again have a new top person in charge of the parent company, and they're restructuring everything. So I've been reading a lot of stuff recently suggesting that DC is once again looking at licensing out their characters, and so I've seen a lot of talk about, well, where should they send the characters? What would happen if Marvel licensed the characters? What would happen if, say, Boom licensed the characters? Like different things like that. But I started thinking about it, and I had this crazy idea. Now, I don't think DC would ever do this, but I'll sort of address the reasons why I don't think this will happen, but also why I think it should happen. And that is, what if instead of DC licensing out their characters to one company, what if they made their characters an open license and allowed everybody to make comics with them? Now, as you know, I make comics myself, and I tend to use, in a lot of those comics, Golden Age public domain characters, and there's quite a robust group of creators who do this as well, from self-published indie stuff like me and like my comic Cthulhu vs. Uncle Sam, which is currently live on Kickstarter, um, and other people like me that are doing things on Kickstarter, up to the bigger companies like Dynamite is the one that's probably best known for doing things, with Alex Ross, and doing, the Black Terror and different titles with Golden Age public domain superheroes. But Antarctic also does it, AC Comics with FemForce, that sort of thing. So it's been going on for a long time. There's also people that do comics where they make characters and they put them in the public domain. Now, technically, they're not in the public domain, but they issue like a Creative Commons license that allows anyone to use them for whatever they want, right? And so it would have to be a little bit tighter with DC. I'll talk about that in a second. But it occurred to me how interesting it would be if DC treated their property more like a video game publisher. Now, some video game that some of the games that I play, they control the main game, but they will open up the source code so that people can do their own mods and they can make their own modifications to the game that then change how the game plays. And they'll actually give people the programming tools that they use for the main game and allow them to change them. And in some cases, that's resulted in entirely new, incredibly popular gaming franchises being created because the source code was made open for everybody. There's also companies that license out their source code and or their creative engines, the programming that runs the game. So for instance, obviously the people at Epic make literally billions of dollars from Fortnite, but I think they've made as much or even more money because they're licensing out the engine. I think it's Unreal Engine, but it's been a while since I've really been digging into the gaming stuff. But the underlying infrastructure, the programming that makes the games work and allows them to render the things, they license that out to companies, and companies then make their own games using the same proprietary technology, right? So I started thinking, what if DC did that? What would happen to the market if DC said, we're going to own the characters, but we're going to have this open license where for a certain fee, or if you meet certain rules, or however they want to set it up, you are allowed to license those characters. And it wouldn't even necessarily be an exclusive license, right? So they could say anybody who meets these certain criteria and wants to pay us X amount of money per year, whatever, or 5 years or month, or however they want to set it up, will then have the rights to make their own Batman comic, right? Or their own Superman comic. And they would license out the rights to whatever character or characters they're going to be using and have access to that, right? Now, of course, the reason I think DC won't do it is kind of twofold. One, I think that there are companies that would not want to license it out if other people are doing it. So it may be very appealing to Marvel to be able to have control of the DC characters to put out a line of comics. But if there's other people that also have it and it's not exclusive, they may not want to do it. So that's number one. So that's a real possibility. And then also there's the accountability. Now DC doesn't want to put out their own comics, theoretically. This is what I'm hearing, because they don't make any money. But they want to have the licensing, right? They want the characters to still be, they want comics and stuff to still be coming out to keep the characters vibrant and vital and, keep people, the engine churning, but they don't want to do it themselves. And so the tricky part is they want to make sure that their brand isn't diminished by someone putting out something really crappy or offensive or something like that. So there would have to be a lot of oversight by the people at DC to sort of regulate and make sure that people weren't putting out, offensive or pornographic stuff if it was more of an open license. So there's definitely hurdles, and for those reasons, I don't think DC would ever go for this sort of thing. They probably would also make less money doing it this way. However, as I just said, I think their main thing they're looking for is exposure and not actually getting money from the licensing fees, right? They want to make sure their properties stay current. And that's where I think they would have a huge benefit from this idea. Because imagine if everybody could put out a Batman comic. And by everybody, within reason, for people that meet their criteria. But what if you went to the comic book store and you have Marvel's Batman series on the shelf, and right next to it you have Image's Batman series, and next to that you have Dynamite's Batman series, and next to that is Boom Studios' Batman series, and next to that is Archie's Batman 66 crossover ongoing series, and then next to that you have independent indie creators that have enough clout. Like, what if next to that you have Robert Kirkman's Batman, right? It would create a market, I think, where not only would we as readers get this huge boom in the number of comics featuring our favorite characters, we would also get to choose among all of these different competitor Batman titles. So let's say there's 7 different Batman titles every month, or 10 different Batman titles every month, and they're all being put out by different creators who have their own visions. We can see which ones we like, which ones we don't like, and it just excites me on a creative level to think about the stories that people could tell. Like, you go to the store and here you have Marvel's version of Batman, and right next to it is like Todd McFarlane's Batman, and next to that is Robert Kirkman's Batman, and you have all the different people making their own Batmans, right? Or Superman or Wonder Woman. And so for DC, the benefit is you have huge buzz around the character, and then you also have all of these different titles. You have them, so it's you have actually a bigger market share with your characters with other people publishing them, right? And then if you do allow smaller publishers to do stuff as well, think of all the stuff you'll be able to get on Kickstarter and online and on in indie books and stuff like that. And not even with just the main characters. Like, for instance, let's say that they did something like this, and the fees or whatever were reasonable enough that someone someone who self-publishes like me could actually afford to do some of the smaller characters, and potentially fund the licensing through the Kickstarters, right? I wouldn't have any interest in any of those big characters. I mean, I like Wonder Woman, but I don't have any stories in mind for Wonder Woman. No, I would want to be doing the smaller characters. I'd want to be doing Jonah Hex stories. I want to be doing Warlord stories and Unknown Soldier, and like those are the characters that I like from DC. Are their sort of second level genre offbeat characters, and so that's a huge section of the market that nobody has right now. Because when New 52 came out or whatever, DC put out a few of those, like they put in Amethyst, and every once in a while they'll put out something because they want to keep the trademarks active, right? But you're not getting any of those because of the market forces. But if anybody can make these things, you're going to see passion projects from people who love the characters. And that means that as a reader, I'm going to be able to see all of these comics that I love that haven't been published in decades because the genre is no longer popular. Now those will be coming back. So, and again, for DC, you'll have a lot more publicity for a lot more characters. You'll have a lot of minor, secondary, forgotten characters from the past coming back into the spotlight. So that's what I think the benefits would be of DC. Instead of licensing, saying, you give us $10 million a year, Marvel, and you publish the comics, or you guys at Valiant, you give us the $30 million for the next 2 years or whatever, and then you can publish Justice League and whatever. Instead of doing it that way, say open sourcing, Creative Commons. If you meet a certain criteria, if you meet a certain level of, you are bringing in this amount of money to us, or you have this many sales, or on Kickstarter you have a track record, we have this many projects, like you can prove that you're a legitimate comic book creating entity, and you agree to the oversight, like the DC Comics Code Authority, to make sure you're not doing anything bad to the characters, then anybody can do something. And I think it would be tremendous for comics. I think you'd see so much cool stuff. You see so many creators who would love to do things with these characters but can't, because DC has to sign off. They have to do it within the structure. Imagine if they didn't have to do it within the structure. Imagine if people could just tell the stories they want to tell with these characters, right? Without having to fit them into a giant crossover that's dictated by the company, or fit the specific editor-in-chief's vision for what the line would be, or what the CEO thinks the direction of the line should be. Imagine the creative outpouring and goodwill and just the revitalization of DC Comics. So in a very weird way, if DC were to allow everybody to use their comics, it would make DC, I think, a much stronger brand spread out than it is as its own individual like corporate entity. So I think it would be fantastic. I don't think it'll ever happen, but it would be great if someone really thought outside the box like this and did something just like super cool, and it led to like creative solutions. So let me know what you think down below. Pie in the sky, but what if we're, it's anything's possible these days, and can't wait to see what happens. But I would love to see this happen. So thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.